When I saw my daughter-in-law sobbing over my husband's casket, clutching the flowers like her life depended on it, I believed every tear until her phone lit up in her shaking hand. The church smelled like lilies and old wood polish, the kind of smell that settles into your clothes and stays there long after grief has loosened its grip. I remember thinking how strange it was that death had a scent. My husband's funeral was quiet, dignified, the way he would have wanted it. Soft hymns, muted voices, people lining up to tell me what a good man he'd been. And he was. God help me, he really was. I stood at the front, near the closed casket, my hands folded so tightly my knuckles ached. My black dress itched at the seams. I hadn't slept properly in days, and every sound, the scrape of shoes on the church floor, the rustle of tissues, felt too loud inside my head. Then I noticed her. Lena, my daughter-in-law. She was kneeling beside the casket, shoulders trembling, her face buried in her hands. She cried harder than anyone else, harder than my son, harder than me. At one point, she leaned forward and pressed her forehead gently against the polished wood, whispering something I couldn't hear. People noticed. A few women murmured how sweet she was, how lucky I was to have such a loving daughter-in-law. Someone squeezed my arm and said, "She loved him like her own father." I nodded, because that was easier than speaking. I told myself her tears meant respect, gratitude, maybe even guilt for not spending more time with him these past months. My husband, Mark, had been ill before the accident, tired, quieter than usual, but nothing that suggested the kind of secret that would hollow my chest hours later. As Lena stood up, her hands were shaking so badly she almost dropped her phone. That's when I saw the screen light up. Just a flash, a name, a single line of text. I can't believe he's really gone. The message wasn't from my son. It was from a contact saved simply as M. I didn't know why that detail lodged itself in my mind. At the time, grief does strange things. It sharpens you in odd places, dulls you in others. I told myself it was nothing, maybe a cousin, a coworker, anyone. But as Lena wiped her face and looked around, her eyes met mine, and for the briefest second, something flickered across her expression. Fear. Not the fear of loss, the fear of being seen. Before all of this, my life had been ordinary, comfortably so. Mark and I had been married for 36 years. We met in our early 20s, both stubborn, both dreaming small but steady dreams. He was a mechanic who took pride in honest work. I taught at the local elementary school until retirement. Our home wasn't fancy. Beige siding, a porch that creaked when you stepped too hard, but it held decades of laughter, arguments, and quiet forgiveness. We raised one son, Daniel. He was our miracle baby, born after years of trying. From the moment I held him, I knew my heart would never be fully my own again. Daniel grew up kind, a little reserved like his father. He married Lena 8 years ago. At first, I was wary. Mothers always are. Lena was younger than Daniel by almost 6 years, sharp-tongued when she wanted to be, quick with a laugh when she didn't. She worked in marketing, always dressed nicely, always on her phone, but she loved my son, or at least she seemed to, and she treated me with enough respect. Over time, we found our rhythm. Sunday dinners became a tradition. Roast chicken, mashed potatoes, green beans cooked too long. Mark liked them that way. Lena would help me in the kitchen, talking about work, complaining about Daniel leaving his socks everywhere. She called me Mom after the first year, and I remember how proud that made Mark. He said it meant we'd done something right. Looking back, there were moments that feel off now, but hindsight is a cruel narrator. Mark had grown closer to Lena in the past 2 years, or so I thought. He offered to drive her places when Daniel worked late, fix small things around their house. Once I teased him gently, said he was spoiling her more than he ever spoiled me. He smiled, that soft, familiar smile. He said, "She's family." I believed him. The day Mark died was sudden. A car accident on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. A drunk driver ran a red light. They told me he didn't suffer. I clung to that sentence like a lifeline. In the days that followed, Lena was attentive, too attentive maybe. She called me every morning, brought over casseroles I couldn't taste, sat beside me on the couch, rubbing my back while I stared at the blank television screen. Daniel grieved in his own quiet way, shutting down, retreating into himself. Lena, though, fell apart openly. She cried at night, loudly, the kind of crying that demanded comfort. At one point, I found her sitting alone in our guest room, holding one of Mark's old sweaters to her chest. "I just miss him so much," she said, her voice breaking. I hugged her, because that's what you do when someone is hurting. I didn't know then that grief can wear many disguises, and some of them look a lot like love. The funeral ended with people drifting out into the gray afternoon, umbrellas opening like dark flowers in the rain. Daniel walked ahead, his shoulders hunched. Lena lingered behind, speaking softly with a woman from church. I stood there alone for a moment, staring at the casket, trying to understand how a whole life could be reduced to polished wood and whispered prayers. When I finally turned to leave, I noticed Lena sitting at a pew near the back, her phone in her lap. She wasn't crying anymore. Her face was pale, tight. Her fingers hovered over the screen. Then she typed. I didn't mean to look, truly, but something pulled my eyes there, some quiet instinct I didn't yet recognize. "I can't do this without you." She hit send. And that was the moment, standing in that emptying church, surrounded by flowers meant for the dead, that the ground beneath my grief began to shift. Because suddenly, I wasn't just a widow. I was a woman standing at the edge of a truth I wasn't ready to face. Grief has a way of rearranging time. Days blurred together, nights stretch on endlessly. After the funeral, the house felt too big and too quiet, like it was holding its breath without Mark in it. Every creak of the floorboards reminded me of his footsteps. Every unfinished cup of coffee on the counter felt like an accusation. Lena stayed close those first few days. Too close, if I'm honest. She slept on the couch one night, said she didn't want me to be alone. Daniel barely noticed. He'd grown distant in his grief, locking himself away in the garage or disappearing on long walks without his phone. That night, I lay awake in my bedroom, staring at the ceiling, listening to the hum of the refrigerator down the hall. Around 2 in the morning, I heard the soft glow of a phone light under the guest room door. Lena had moved there after insisting I take my own bed. I told myself not to think about it. But that text, "I don't know how to do this without you," kept echoing in my head. The next morning, I found Lena in the kitchen before sunrise. She stood at the counter, scrolling through her phone, her hair pulled into a messy knot. She looked startled when she noticed me. "Oh, Mom, I didn't hear you." Her voice cracked on the word Mom. "You're up early," I said gently. She nodded too quickly. "Couldn't sleep." Neither could I, but I didn't say that. We moved around each other quietly, making coffee, pretending everything was still normal. I watched her out of the corner of my eye, the way she kept her phone face down on the counter, the way her fingers trembled when a notification buzzed. When Daniel came in, she relaxed visibly, slid the phone into her pocket, kissed his cheek. I felt something cold settle in my stomach. Later that afternoon, while Daniel was out running errands, Lena offered to help me sort through Mark's things. I wasn't ready, not really, but I didn't want to seem ungrateful. So we started with his dresser, socks, undershirts, neatly folded the way I'd always done them. She handed me items carefully, like each one might shatter. I loved him so much, she said quietly. I nodded. He loved you too. The words slipped out without thought. Her hands froze mid-motion. I mean, I corrected myself, feeling foolish. He loved you like family. She swallowed hard. Of course. We worked in silence after that. At one point, she excused herself to the bathroom, taking her phone with her. I noticed. I hated myself for noticing. After she left, I sat down on the edge of the bed, surrounded by 36 years of marriage reduced to fabric and wood. My eyes drifted to the nightstand drawer. I hadn't opened it yet. It felt private. But grief makes you curious in ways you don't expect. Inside were Mark's glasses, a folded handkerchief, and his old phone charger. Nothing else. No secrets hiding there. I told myself I was imagining things. That night, after Lena went home with Daniel, I finally allowed myself to cry properly, the kind of crying that comes from the chest, from somewhere deep and broken. I cried until my eyes burned and my throat felt raw. When I finally slept, I dreamed of Mark standing just out of reach, trying to tell me something I couldn't hear. The next week passed in a strange haze. Sympathy cards arrived daily. Casseroles filled my fridge. People checked in, then slowly returned to their lives. Lena's calls became less frequent. Daniel spent more time at work. The house grew quieter. One afternoon, while folding laundry, I heard Mark's old tablet chime from the study. The sound startled me. It hadn't been used in months. I stood there for a moment, heart racing, before walking toward the sound. The tablet lay on his desk, screen lit. A message preview glowed across the screen. I miss you. I don't know how to pretend anymore. The sender was saved as L. My hands went numb. I told myself there had to be an explanation. Maybe Mark had used the tablet for something work-related. Maybe it was old. But when I touched the screen, it unlocked immediately. No password. Mark never bothered with those. The message thread was open. Recent. My breath came shallow as I scrolled. There were weeks, months of messages, conversations filled with longing, arguments, apologies, little details about their days, complaints about Daniel, jokes I recognized, Mark's jokes. My heart pounded so loudly I thought I might faint. Then I saw her name in full, Lena. I sat down heavily in his chair, my legs barely holding me. The messages were careful at first, innocent enough to hide behind family closeness. Then they changed, became intimate, familiar, words no daughter-in-law should ever write to her husband's father. I wish things were different. If only we had more time. I hate lying to him. My hands shook as I scrolled further. And then I found it. A message from Mark sent 3 months before his death. If anything happens to me, you need to be strong. For him, for us. For us. The room spun. I don't know how long I sat there staring at the screen, trying to make sense of a reality that no longer fit the life I thought I'd lived. My husband, my son's wife, a secret so large it had lived inside my home without me ever noticing. Anger came next, hot, sharp, choking. But beneath it, grief, a different kind, the kind that mourns not just a person, but the version of them you thought you knew. I didn't confront anyone that day. I closed the tablet gently, like it might explode if handled too roughly, then placed it back exactly where it had been. Then I went to the bathroom and threw up. That night, Lena called. "I just wanted to check in on you," she said softly. "You've been on my mind." I gripped the phone so tightly my fingers hurt. "I'm okay, just tired." There was a pause. "If you need anything, anything at all." Her voice wavered.
I'll let you know. After we hung up, I sat in the dark living room, the only light coming from the street lamp outside. I replayed every interaction, every smile, every hug. The way she cried at the funeral, the way she held his sweater, the way she texted M while standing over his casket. It hadn't been grief. It had been loss. And suddenly, everything made a terrible kind of sense. Over the next few days, I gathered myself quietly. I reread the messages, forcing myself to absorb the truth instead of flinching away from it. I took notes, dates, patterns. The affair had started nearly 2 years ago. 2 years of lies. I wondered how long Daniel had been living beside them, completely unaware. The thought of telling my son made my chest ache. He was already broken. This truth would shatter him. But silence felt like betrayal, too. One evening, Lena stopped by unexpectedly. She stood in the doorway, twisting her wedding ring around her finger. "Can I come in?" I stepped aside. She sat on the couch, eyes darting around the room like she was afraid of what she might find. "I've been feeling off since the funeral," she said. I sat across from her, my posture straight, my voice calm. "Grief does that." She looked at me, really looked at me, like she was searching for something. "Did Mark ever say anything to you before he died?" My heart pounded, but my face remained still. "No. Why?" She swallowed. "No reason." The silence between us grew thick. Finally, she stood. I should go. As she reached for the door, I spoke. "I saw your text at the funeral." She froze. Slowly, she turned around. "What text?" she asked, though her voice betrayed her. "The one from M," I said quietly. Her face drained of color. And in that moment, before either of us spoke another word, I knew the truth was about to tear what little was left of our family wide open. For a long moment, neither of us moved. The clock on the wall ticked steadily, each second loud in the silence. Lena's hand hovered near the doorknob, her fingers trembling like they'd lost their strength. She didn't look at me at first. She stared at the floor, at the worn patch of carpet where Mark used to stand to take off his shoes. "I don't know what you think you saw," she said finally, her voice thin, rehearsed. I stayed seated. My legs felt heavy, rooted to the floor. "I saw enough." She laughed once, sharp, brittle. "You're grieving. We all are. Sometimes grief makes us imagine things." Her words stung more than I expected. I had spent my whole life trusting my instincts, my sense of people. To have her dismiss me like that felt like another betrayal layered on top of the first. "I found the messages," I said. Her breath caught audibly. "The tablet," I continued, still calm, still controlled, "in Mark's study." She turned then, fully facing me. Her eyes were wide, glossy with tears that didn't quite spill. For a second, she looked like a child caught in a lie. "I didn't mean for it to happen," she whispered. Those words, the most common ones spoken in moments like this, hit me harder than any accusation could have. "Did you love him?" I asked. The question surprised both of us. Lena sank back onto the couch, her shoulders collapsing inward. "I don't know," she said. "At first it was just comfort. He listened. He saw me. Daniel was always busy, always tired." I clenched my jaw. I thought of all the nights Mark and I had sat at that same table, quietly sharing a cup of tea. Had he been listening to her while sitting across from me? "Comfort doesn't look like this," I said. "This was a choice, over and over again." She nodded, tears finally spilling. I know. I waited. I didn't rush her. This wasn't about shouting, it was about truth. "He was going to tell you," she said suddenly, "before the accident." My heart lurched. "Tell me what?" "Everything," she said. "He said he couldn't live with the lies anymore." I laughed then, a hollow sound that surprised me. "Funny how death makes people brave." She flinched. "I never wanted to hurt you, either of you." "And yet," I replied quietly, "here we are." We sat there, the two of us, bound together by a man who was no longer there to explain himself or defend his choices. "What do you want?" she asked eventually. It was the wrong question. "What I want doesn't matter. What matters is what Daniel deserves." Her head snapped up. "You can't tell him." The panic in her voice was raw, unfiltered. "He's already grieving," she continued, words tumbling out. "This would destroy him. He'd never forgive either of us." Either of us. I noted that carefully. "You should have thought about that before," I said. She reached for my hand, then stopped herself. "Please, I'm begging you." I stood then, slowly, my knees unsteady but my resolve firm. "You don't get to ask me for mercy, not after what you did." Her face crumpled. "Then what are you going to do?" I looked at her for a long moment, memorizing the way guilt sat on her features. "I'm going to take some time," I said, "and then I'm going to tell the truth." Her sobs followed me as I walked to the bedroom and closed the door. That night, I didn't sleep. I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, replaying every memory of my marriage through a new lens. The late nights Mark claimed were overtime, the sudden interest in his appearance, the way he defended Lena a little too quickly when Daniel and she argued. I thought of my son, Daniel, who still called me every morning to make sure I'd eaten, who had no idea that his wife and his father had shared something he'd never be allowed to touch again. By morning, my eyes were swollen and my body ached, but my mind was clear. I wasn't going to scream the truth from the rooftops. I wasn't going to humiliate Lena publicly or turn my grief into a spectacle. But I wasn't going to protect a lie either. I asked Daniel to come over that evening, just him. He arrived after work, his tie loosened, his face tired. He hugged me longer than usual. "You okay, Mom?" he asked softly. "As okay as I can be," I said. We sat at the kitchen table, the same one where he'd done his homework, where Mark and I had planned our future. I poured us tea, my hand steady despite the storm inside me. "There's something I need to tell you," I said. He nodded, concern etched into his face. I took a breath. "It's about your father." His shoulders stiffened. "What about him?" I slid the tablet across the table. "What's this?" he asked. "Read," I said. He frowned, unlocked it, and began to scroll. At first, confusion, then disbelief, then pain so sharp it took my breath away just watching him. "No, no, no." His hand shook. He scrolled faster, as if the words would rearrange themselves into something less cruel. "I don't understand. This can't be real." "I wish it wasn't," I said. He looked up at me, eyes red. "How long did you know?" "Not long," I replied. He laughed bitterly. "So I'm the last one to find out." I reached for his hand. He didn't pull away. "I'm sorry. I'm so sorry." He covered his face, shoulders shaking. I let him cry. I let the silence stretch. After a long while, he straightened. "She knew," he said. "Lena knew you knew." I nodded. "She begged you not to tell me," I added. He exhaled sharply. "Of course she did." "What do you want to do?" I asked gently. He stared at the table. "I don't know. I don't think I can look at her right now." "I understand. She lied to me every day in my own house." His voice broke on the last word. Lena came home that night to a quiet house. Daniel didn't yell, he didn't throw things. He sat on the edge of the bed, tablet in hand, and asked her one question. "Is it true?" She collapsed in front of him, sobbing, confessing everything. I wasn't there, but I didn't need to be to imagine it. I'd seen enough guilt to recognize its patterns. 2 days later, Daniel moved into my guest room. Lena stayed in their house alone. The community found out slowly, not through gossip, but through absence. Lena stopped coming to family events. Daniel stopped wearing his ring. People whispered, but no one asked me directly. I held my head high. I refused to let shame take root where truth had finally been planted. Weeks passed. Mark's belongings were sorted, legal matters settled. Grief settled into something quieter, heavier. One afternoon, Lena showed up at my door. She looked smaller somehow, thinner, her eyes hollow. "I just wanted to say goodbye," she said. "To what?" I asked. "To you," she replied. "To this family." I studied her face, searching for the girl I'd once welcomed into my home. "I hope you learn from this," I said finally. She nodded, tears spilling. "I already have." She left without another word. That night, I sat alone on the porch, listening to the cicadas hum in the dark. I thought of Mark, not the man he'd become in his final years, but the one I'd loved for most of my life. I realized then that loving someone doesn't mean excusing their worst choices, and protecting your child sometimes means breaking your own heart all over again.
Life didn't return to normal after that. It shifted, quietly, permanently, like furniture rearranged in the dark. You know the room is different, even if you can't quite say why. Daniel stayed with me for a while. At first, he barely spoke. He went to work, came home, ate whatever I put in front of him, and retreated to the guest room. At night, I heard him casing. Sometimes I heard him crying, muffled by walls that suddenly felt too thin. I didn't push him. Grief stacked on grief has a way of suffocating people if you press too hard. Instead, I focused on small things, cooking meals, folding his laundry the way I used to when he was a boy, sitting at the table with him in the evenings, even when silence was all we shared. One night, as we ate reheated soup, he finally spoke. "I keep thinking I missed something," he said, staring into his bowl. "Some sign, some moment where I could have stopped it." "You didn't fail," I said gently. "What they did wasn't your responsibility." He nodded, but I could tell he wasn't convinced. I understood that feeling too well. There were moments when anger flared unexpectedly. I'd be washing dishes and suddenly slam a plate into the sink harder than necessary. Or I'd hear a song Mark used to hum and feel my throat close up. I let myself feel it all. That, I was learning, was part of healing. Lena reached out a few times after she left. Short messages, apologies that felt heavy with regret but light on understanding. I didn't respond. Not out of cruelty, but because some conversations require distance to breathe. Daniel filed for separation quietly. No dramatic announcements, no social media posts, just paperwork and resolve. The family reacted in pieces. My sister called first, then a cousin, then an old friend from church. Each conversation was careful, respectful. No one pressed for details. Maybe they sensed that this was a story better handled gently. I appreciated that. What surprised me most was the way people looked at me, not with pity, but with something closer to respect. "You handled it with such grace," one woman told me, squeezing my hand after service. Grace. I wasn't sure I felt graceful. Mostly I felt tired. But I accepted the word anyway. One afternoon, months after the funeral, Daniel came home early from work. He sat across from me at the kitchen table, his posture straighter than it had been in weeks. "I'm moving out," he said. My heart skipped. Where? He found a small apartment near work. It's time. I nodded, even though a part of me wanted to keep him close a little longer. "I'm proud of you," I said. He smiled faintly. "I learned that from you." After he moved, the house felt empty in a new way, less heavy, more open. I started doing things for myself again, gardening, long walks in the morning, volunteering at the community center once a week. Slowly, the sharp edges of betrayal softened into something more manageable. I wasn't forgetting, I was integrating. One evening, as I sorted through old photo albums, I found a picture of Mark and me from our early years. We were standing in front of our first car, arms around each other, smiling like we had all the time in the world. I studied his face. "I loved you, but you hurt us," I whispered. Saying it out loud felt important. It allowed me to hold both truths at once. The following spring, Lena returned, not to my house, but to the edges of my life. I saw her at the grocery store one afternoon, standing in the produce aisle, examining apples like they held answers. She looked healthier than the last time I'd seen her, calmer, sad, but not frantic. Our eyes met. She hesitated, then approached slowly. "Hi," she said. "Hello, Lena." She swallowed. "I didn't expect to see you." Neither did I. We stood there, the hum of refrigerators filling the space between us. "I just wanted to say," then she stopped. "I know I've said it before, but I'm sorry. Truly." I considered her words. "I believe you, but belief doesn't erase consequences." She nodded. "I know." She looked down at her hands. "I start therapy next week." "That's good," I said honestly. She smiled sadly. "I hope someday you can think of me without pain." I met her eyes. "That will take time." She accepted that. As she walked away, I realized something surprising. I didn't feel rage. I felt closure. Daniel called me that night. "I ran into Lena today," he said. "I did too," I replied. He was quiet for a moment. "How did you feel?" I thought carefully. "At peace," I said. He exhaled. "Me too." Summer came, then fall. The house grew quieter, but not lonely. I filled it with laughter from friends, with the smell of fresh bread and music Mark used to love, played softly, without bitterness. One afternoon, while tending the garden, I found myself humming. It startled me. Life, it seemed, was still capable of surprising me. I often think about that moment at the funeral, the text lighting up Lena's phone like a small, cruel beacon. How close I came to ignoring it, how easy it would have been to look away. But truth has a way of insisting on itself. It taps you on the shoulder, softly at first, then louder, until you listen. In the end, I didn't just lose a husband, I lost illusions, and in their place, I gained something harder earned and far more valuable. My voice, my boundaries, my peace. There are moments when grief loosens its grip so quietly you don't notice right away. For me, it happened on an ordinary Tuesday morning. I was standing at the kitchen sink, washing a single mug, sunlight slanting through the window in that soft, forgiving way it only does in early autumn. The radio played low in the background, nothing remarkable. And suddenly I realized I wasn't bracing myself against the day. I was just living it. That realization brought tears to my eyes, not the sharp, aching kind, but something gentler. Gratitude, maybe, or relief. Healing doesn't announce itself. It tiptoes in when you're not looking. Daniel settled into his new place faster than I expected. He invited me over one Sunday afternoon, proudly showing me his small but tidy apartment. The walls were bare, but the air felt lighter. "I'm thinking of getting a dog," he said, half smiling. I raised an eyebrow. "You? A dog?" "Yeah," he said. "Someone to come home to." I understood that more than he knew. We cooked dinner together that night. It wasn't fancy, just pasta and salad, but it felt important, like a marker in time. "I don't know if I'll ever forgive them," he said quietly as we ate. "You don't have to," I replied. "Forgiveness isn't a deadline." He nodded, absorbing that. "What I do know," he added, "is that I don't want bitterness to decide the rest of my life." I reached across the table and squeezed his hand. "That's wisdom," I said. "Pain teaches it whether we ask for it or not." As months passed, I began sorting through the last of Mark's things, not with dread this time, but with intention. I kept what mattered, let go of what didn't. One afternoon, tucked inside an old book, I found a letter I didn't remember seeing before. My name was written on the envelope in Mark's familiar handwriting. My heart thudded. I sat down before opening it. The letter wasn't an apology, not in the way movies imagine them. It was clumsy, honest, regretful in places, defensive in others. He wrote about feeling invisible, about aging, about making a mistake he didn't know how to undo. "I loved you," he wrote. "I just didn't know how to face what I'd broken." I folded the letter slowly. It didn't absolve him, but it helped me understand. And understanding, I was learning, is sometimes the final gift a broken relationship can offer. Winter came gently that year. No storms, just cold mornings and quiet nights. I spent Christmas with Daniel and my sister. We laughed more than I expected. We remembered Mark without tension, just stories shared softly. At one point, Daniel looked across the table and said, "I don't know how you did it." "Did what?" I asked. "Stayed kind," he said, "after everything." I considered that. I didn't stay kind for them. I stayed kind for myself. That truth felt solid in my chest. Spring returned. On the anniversary of Mark's death, I visited the cemetery alone. I brought fresh flowers, simple ones, nothing extravagant. I stood there for a long time, listening to the wind move through the trees. "I forgive you," I said aloud, "but I won't forget." The words didn't feel heavy. They felt freeing. Life moved forward in quiet, meaningful ways. New routines, new joys, small plans for the future. I joined a book club, traveled a little, learned to enjoy my own company in a way I never had before. And sometimes, late at night, I thought about that woman I was at the funeral, standing frozen, heart already breaking without knowing why. I wanted to reach back through time and take her hand, to tell her she would survive, that she would grow stronger in ways she couldn't imagine yet, that betrayal, while devastating, would not be the end of her story. If there's one lesson this experience taught me, it's this. Truth may arrive wrapped in pain, but it also carries clarity. And clarity, once you have it, is something no one can take from you. Thank you for listening to my story. If you've ever stood at the edge of a truth you weren't ready for,
if you've ever had to choose between keeping the peace and honoring yourself, I want to ask you.
Time has a way of softening the sharpest memories, not by erasing them, but by placing them where they belong. A year passed, then another. I stopped measuring my life in before and after and started measuring it in moments again. Ordinary ones, the kind that don't announce themselves as important until later. Like the afternoon I repainted the guest room. Daniel had taken most of his things, but the walls still held echoes of him. Posters he'd taped up in college, the dent in the door from when he'd slammed it as a teenager. I rolled on a pale blue color, watching the old marks disappear beneath fresh paint. It felt symbolic in a way I didn't need to analyze. When I finished, I sat on the floor, my back against the wall, breathing in the clean smell of something new. For the first time since Mark died, the house felt like mine again. Daniel came by more often after that, not because he needed to, but because he wanted to. One Saturday morning, he showed up with coffee and pastries, standing on the porch like he used to when he was younger. "I thought we could fix the back fence," he said. I smiled. "Your father would have liked that." He nodded. "I know." We worked side by side in comfortable silence, the rhythm of hammering nails grounding in its simplicity. At one point, Daniel paused, leaning on the fence. "I still get angry," he admitted, "sometimes out of nowhere." "So do I," said. He looked relieved by that. "But it doesn't control me anymore," he added. "That's the difference. Anger that visits versus anger that lives with you." He considered that, then nodded slowly. Not everyone healed at the same pace. Lena faded from our lives gradually, like a photograph left in the sun too long. I heard through others that she'd moved to a different city, started a new job, changed her hair. Reinvention, they called it. I didn't begrudge her that. Consequences don't always mean punishment. Sometimes they mean starting over without the comforts you once took for granted. Occasionally, I wondered if she still thought about Mark, if she carried that love or illusion of love with her like unfinished business. But those thoughts no longer had claws. They passed through me and moved on. One evening, while sorting old paperwork, I came across Mark's life insurance documents. I'd already handled the practical parts long ago, but something caught my eye this time. A small beneficiary change made months before his death. My name was still there. So was Daniel's. And beneath it, in smaller print, a note in Mark's handwriting attached to the file. "Please take care of him." I stared at those words for a long time. For all his failures, Mark had loved his son deeply. That truth sat beside the others, no longer fighting for dominance. People are rarely just one thing. That realization followed me into other parts of my life. I became less quick to judge, more willing to sit with complexity, more forgiving of my own blind spots. At the community center, I began mentoring younger women, ones navigating marriages, divorces, caregiving, grief. I didn't offer advice unless asked. Mostly I listened. One woman, not much older than Lena had been when she married Daniel, confided in me after a session. "I'm scared of becoming invisible," she said. Her words caught in my chest. "I know that fear," I told her. "But invisibility doesn't come from age or routine. It comes from silence." She nodded, eyes wet. "I don't want to disappear." "Then don't," I said gently. "Speak early, speak honestly, and don't shrink yourself to keep others comfortable." As the words left my mouth, I realized they were as much for me as for her. On what would have been my 40th wedding anniversary, I did something unexpected. I went out to dinner alone.
I chose a quiet restaurant downtown, wore a dress I liked, ordered a glass of wine. I ate slowly, savoring each bite, watching other people live their lives around me. At first, the empty chair across from me felt heavy. Then it didn't. I raised my glass, not in bitterness, not in longing, but in acknowledgement of a life fully lived, with all its flaws. "I'm still here," I murmured, and I meant it. Daniel called me later that night. "I was thinking about Dad, about everything," he said. So was I. I don't know if I'll ever understand why he did what he did, but I'm starting to understand how. That distinction mattered. He was afraid. Not an excuse, just a reason. He exhaled. "I don't want to become that man." "You won't. You're already asking different questions." The following year brought changes I hadn't anticipated. A new neighbor moved in next door, a widower, polite, reserved. We exchanged small talk over fences, shared tomatoes from our gardens. Nothing more. And that was enough. For the first time in decades, my life wasn't defined by who stood beside me. It was defined by who I was. Sometimes, late at night, I still thought about the moment that started it all. The glow of a phone screen at a funeral, the instinct I nearly ignored. I understood now that intuition isn't loud. It doesn't shout. It waits. And when you're ready, it tells you the truth. I didn't come out of this story untouched. I came out changed, stronger in some places, softer in others, and wiser about the cost of silence and the quiet power of dignity. The past no longer asks me to explain it. It simply asks me to remember. And I do. Without bitterness, without denial, just truth.
There are certain memories that never leave you. They don't ache anymore, but they remain. Quiet markers along the road of who you've become. One of mine is the sound of that church door closing after the funeral, the heavy thud of it echoing behind the last mourner. The way the air shifted when the room emptied, as if grief itself had finally exhaled. For a long time, that sound lived in my body. I'd hear it in unexpected moments, when a door shut too hard, when a chapter ended without warning. But eventually, even that sound softened. 2 years after Mark's death, I finally changed the bedroom. Not just the furniture, the feeling. I'd slept on my side of the bed long after it stopped making sense, clinging to habit like a lifeline. One afternoon, I stripped the sheets, opened the windows, and let fresh air rush in. I donated the old comforter, bought new curtains, moved the bed slightly, just enough to change the way the morning light hit the walls. That night, I slept deeply. No dreams, no ghosts, just rest. Daniel came by the following weekend to help me move a dresser. As we worked, he paused, looking around. "It looks different," he said. "It feels different," I replied. He nodded, understanding more than he said. We took a break on the porch, sipping iced tea. The day was warm, cicadas buzzing softly in the trees. "I've been seeing someone," he said casually. I turned to him, surprised but not startled. "Oh?" "Nothing serious yet," he added quickly. "I just wanted you to know." I smiled. "I'm glad you told me." "She knows about everything," he said. "About Dad, about Lena." "That couldn't have been easy." He shrugged. I didn't want to build anything new on a lie. My heart swelled with something close to pride. That's how you break a cycle. Later that evening, after Daniel left, I sat alone with my thoughts. I realized something then, something small but significant. The story was no longer consuming my present. It had taken its rightful place in the past. That didn't mean it no longer mattered. It meant it no longer demanded. Every so often, I'd receive a message from someone who had heard fragments of what happened. Friends of friends, distant relatives, people seeking reassurance that they weren't alone in their own quiet suspicions.
I never shared details. I shared perspective. I told them that truth doesn't always arrive with drama. Sometimes it arrives as a whisper you keep hearing, even when you try not to listen. And that choosing yourself doesn't always look brave from the outside, but it always feels honest on the inside. On the third anniversary of Mark's passing, I didn't go to the cemetery. Instead, I took a long drive through the countryside, windows down, the radio playing softly. I stopped at a small diner I'd never been to before, ordered pie, talked to no one. It felt like a private acknowledgement, not of loss, but of survival. I thought about the woman I'd been when I married Mark, young, certain, unaware of how many versions of herself she'd have to become. I didn't judge her. I thanked her for loving deeply, for trusting fully, for giving me a life that, even with its fractures, had been rich and real. One afternoon, sorting through old papers one final time, I found Lena's wedding invitation. The cream-colored cardstock had yellowed slightly at the edges. Her handwriting, careful, hopeful, still looked the same. I held it for a long moment. Then I placed it in the recycling bin, not in anger, not in bitterness, but because it no longer belonged to me. People often ask, carefully, politely, if I regret telling Daniel the truth. I never hesitate. No. I regret the pain it caused him. I regret the choices that made the truth necessary, but I do not regret honesty. Because lies don't protect families. They postpone damage, and when they finally surface, they do so with interest. As I grew older, I noticed something shift in the way I carried myself. I took up space more easily, spoke more directly, apologized less for existing. Dignity, I learned, isn't loud. It's steady. It's the decision to walk away from what diminishes you, even when doing so costs you relationships you once thought were unbreakable. Sometimes, late in the evening, I'd sit by the window with a cup of tea and think about forgiveness, not as a gift to others, but as a release for myself. Forgiving Mark didn't mean excusing him. Forgiving Lena didn't mean trusting her. Forgiving myself meant letting go of the belief that I should have known sooner. I couldn't have. The version of me back then didn't yet have the information or the strength I have now, and that's okay. The last time I heard about Lena, she'd remarried, moved again, started a business. I felt nothing sharp when I heard the news, just a quiet hope that she'd learned to stop seeking validation in secret places, that she'd learned the cost of borrowed love. As for me, my life settled into a rhythm that felt earned. Morning walks, afternoon books, evenings filled with small, chosen joys. I laughed more easily now, and when I thought of Mark, it was no longer with confusion or rage, but with clarity. I loved him. He betrayed me. Both things were true. And I survived them. Some stories don't end with reconciliation. They end with understanding, with boundaries, with peace that doesn't depend on anyone else's repentance. This was one of those stories, and it was enough. The strange thing about peace is that it doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It settles in quietly, like a cat choosing a warm patch of sunlight and deciding to stay. By the time I realized peace had made a home in me, it had already rearranged my habits. I no longer replayed conversations in my head while washing dishes. I no longer imagined alternative endings where Mark confessed sooner or Lena chose differently. Those questions had lost their sharp edges. They simply rested. One late afternoon, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. Old instincts still lingered, the ones that told me unexpected calls often carried unwanted weight. But something nudged me to answer. Hello? There was a pause on the other end, a breath, then a familiar voice. It's Alina. I closed my eyes, not in dread, but in preparation. I hope it's okay that I called, she said quickly. If not, I understand. It's okay, I replied, and to my own surprise, it was. She told me she was moving again, this time overseas, a job opportunity she'd worked toward for months. I won't be back, she said. Not often, anyway. I see. Another pause. I wanted to thank you, she said softly. For what? For not turning me into a villain, she said. You could have. You had every reason to. I considered her words. I didn't do it for you, I said honestly. I did it so I could still recognize myself afterward. She exhaled, a sound full of relief and regret tangled together. I think about him less now, she admitted, but when I do, I think about the harm too, not just the comfort. That's growth, I said. She didn't ask for forgiveness, and I didn't offer it. That, I realized, was the truest form of closure. The strange thing about peace is that it doesn't announce itself with fireworks. It settles in quietly, like a cat choosing a warm patch of sunlight and deciding to stay. By the time I realized peace had made a home in me, it had already rearranged my habits. I no longer replayed conversations in my head while washing dishes. I no longer imagined alternative endings where Mark confessed sooner or Lena chose differently. Those questions had lost their sharp edges. They simply rested. One late afternoon, I received a call from a number I didn't recognize. I almost let it go to voicemail. Old instincts still lingered, the ones that told me unexpected calls often carried unwanted weight. But something nudged me to answer. Hello? There was a pause on the other end, a breath, then a familiar voice. It's Alina. I closed my eyes, not in dread, but in preparation. I hope it's okay that I called, she said quickly. If not, I understand. It's okay, I replied, and to my own surprise, it was. She told me she was moving again, this time overseas, a job opportunity she'd worked toward for months. I won't be back, she said, not often anyway. I see. Another pause. I wanted to thank you, she said softly. For what? For not turning me into a villain, she said. You could have. You had every reason to. I considered her words. I didn't do it for you, I said honestly. I did it so I could still recognize myself afterward. She exhaled, a sound full of relief and regret tangled together. I think about him less now, she admitted, but when I do, I think about the harm too, not just the comfort. That's growth, I said. She didn't ask for forgiveness, and I didn't offer it. That, I realized, was the truest form of closure we could have shared. After the call, I sat in the quiet living room, the light outside turning golden. I felt something lift, an old, nearly forgotten tension releasing its hold. That chapter was done. Fully. Daniel came over the following weekend, this time with someone new. Mom, he said, standing a little straighter than usual, this is Rachel. She smiled warmly, her eyes kind but observant, the kind of woman who notices details but doesn't rush to interpret them. It's so nice to finally meet you. Likewise, I replied. We shared a meal, the conversation easy, unforced. Rachel asked thoughtful questions. She listened more than she spoke. When Daniel laughed, it came from a place I hadn't heard in a long time. Later, as they prepared to leave, Daniel lingered by the door. She's good for me, he said quietly. I can see that. And I wouldn't be here, emotionally, if you hadn't done what you did. I placed a hand on his arm. You did the hard part. You chose honesty. He nodded, eyes bright. I learned that from you. That night, after the house grew quiet again, I walked through each room slowly. The guest room, now an office filled with books and sunlight. The kitchen, still worn in places, but alive with memories that no longer hurt. The bedroom, calm, neutral, fully mine. I realized something then. This house had witnessed betrayal, grief, confrontation, and rebuilding, and it still stood. So did I. As I grew older, people began to confide in me more often. Women at the community center, neighbors, even strangers who sensed somehow that I'd lived through something that left its mark. They asked me how I knew when it was time to speak up, how I found the courage to tell the truth, how I lived with knowing someone I loved had deceived me so deeply. I never gave them a single answer, because the truth is, it wasn't one moment, it was many. Small moments of listening to my body when it tightened, moments of choosing discomfort over denial, moments of deciding that peace built on lies wasn't peace at all. On a quiet morning, years after the funeral, I found myself back at that same church, not for grief, for a wedding, a friend's daughter. As I sat in the pew, the familiar smell of polished wood and flowers drifted toward me. For a brief second, memory stirred, but it didn't overwhelm me. It simply passed. When the bride walked down the aisle, glowing and hopeful, I felt no bitterness, only a quiet wish that she'd always feel safe enough to tell the truth, especially to herself. After the ceremony, standing outside beneath a clear blue sky, someone asked me if I believe everything happens for a reason. I smiled gently. No, I said, but I believe we can find reason in what happens. That felt truer. The older I got, the more I understood that dignity isn't about winning. It's about alignment, living in a way that lets you sleep at night, living in a way that doesn't require explanations or justifications, living in a way that honors both your pain and your values. Sometimes, in quiet moments, I still talk to Mark. Not out loud, just in my thoughts. I tell him about Daniel, about how he's learning to love again, about how I'm doing all right. I don't ask questions anymore. There's nothing left to resolve. The memory of Lena crying at the funeral has faded, softened by time and understanding. What once felt like deception now feels like evidence of something more complicated: misplaced love, poor choices, fear of being unseen. I don't excuse it, but I no longer carry it. If I could speak to the woman I was that day, standing in black, watching a phone light up in a shaking hand, I wouldn't warn her. I wouldn't try to protect her from what came next. I would simply say, "You are stronger than this moment, and one day this will not define you." Life doesn't return what it takes, but it does offer something else in its place: perspective, depth, a quieter, steadier kind of joy, and sometimes, if you're willing to face the truth, freedom.
There's a certain stillness that comes when a story has finally finished telling you what it came to teach. Not an ending exactly, more like a quiet understanding that settles in your chest and stays there. That's where I am now. When I look back on everything that happened, the funeral, the text, the truth unraveling in my hands, I don't feel the urge to explain it anymore. I don't feel the need to defend my choices or justify my silence or even my honesty. I did what I could with the woman I was at the time, and that, I've learned, is enough. If you're listening to this and you're somewhere earlier in the story, standing at the edge of a suspicion, feeling that tightening in your chest you can't quite name, I want you to know something. You're not weak for hesitating. You're not foolish for loving. And you're not wrong for sensing that something isn't right, even when you don't yet have proof. We're taught, especially as women, to doubt ourselves first, to assume we're imagining things, to stay quiet so we don't make others uncomfortable. But discomfort is not the same thing as danger, and silence, while it can feel peaceful in the moment, has a way of collecting interest over time. For a long while, I thought strength looked like endurance, staying, holding things together, absorbing pain quietly so others didn't have to feel it. I was wrong. Real strength, the kind that lasts, looks more like alignment. It's when your thoughts, your values, and your actions stop pulling in opposite directions. It's when you choose truth not because it's easy, but because it allows you to sleep at night. I didn't tell my son the truth to punish anyone. I told him because love without honesty is not protection, it's control. And protecting someone by keeping them in the dark isn't kindness, it's a delay of their own healing. Daniel deserved the chance to build his life on solid ground, even if that ground had to be cleared first. So did I. I often think about how easily this story could have gone another way. I could have ignored that text. I could have convinced myself it was none of my business. I could have chosen peace built on pretense. And maybe, for a while, life would have continued as it was. But I would have known, and knowing, while pretending not to, slowly erodes something inside you that doesn't come back easily: your trust in yourself. There's a quiet kind of grief that comes not from losing people, but from losing illusions. The belief that love guarantees loyalty, that time guarantees honesty, that good intentions protect us from harm. Letting go of those beliefs hurts, but what replaces them is something sturdier: discernment, boundaries, a deeper, calmer respect for yourself. I don't hate Lena. I don't romanticize Mark. I don't rewrite the past to make it easier to carry. I let it be what it was: a story of love, betrayal, fear, and growth, woven together the way real lives usually are. If there's a moral here, it isn't about revenge or righteousness. It's about dignity, about choosing not to become smaller to accommodate someone else's secrets, about understanding that healing doesn't require forgiveness on a schedule or reconciliation at any cost. Sometimes healing simply means telling the truth and letting it change you. If you've been listening quietly, nodding along, maybe feeling seen in ways you didn't expect, I want to leave you with this. Pay attention to the moments that make you pause, the moments your body reacts before your mind catches up, the moments when something feels off, even if you can't yet explain why. Those moments are information, and you're allowed to listen to them. Life will ask many things of you: compromise, patience, grace, but it should never ask you to abandon yourself entirely. The cost of that is too high. I know. I've paid it. And I've also learned how to stop. So if you're standing at a crossroads, wondering whether to speak, whether to look closer, whether to ask the question you're afraid of the answer to, I won't tell you what to do. Only you know your life. Only you know your limits. But I will ask you this, gently and honestly: